All right, let's dive in. This time, we're taking on a question that's been around forever, huh? Free will. Like, do we actually have control over the choices we make, or are we just going through the motions? You know what I mean? And for this deep dive, you gave us a whole bunch of readings from the Oxford Handbook of Free Will. So we're gonna dig into some of the main points, the arguments, and hopefully see what we find.
It really is one of those topics that you can just go down the rabbit hole with, and the Oxford Handbook really goes for it. It gives us all these perspectives from philosophy to theology and even physics.
Yeah, it's definitely not light reading, is it?
Right.
Not at all. But I guess we can start with something we can all kind of wrap our heads around. We all have that feeling of free will in our everyday lives, right? Like this morning, I chose to have coffee. I could have had tea, but I went for the coffee.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's exactly it, right? That feeling of being able to pick between different options. That's what we usually think of when we talk about free will. But then you have this other idea, this determinism, this idea that everything that happens, like every single event, including all the choices that we make, all of that is just the result of stuff that happened before, and the laws of nature. So maybe you were always meant to be a coffee drinker. Maybe that latte was inevitable.
Whoa. Okay, hold on. So you're saying that maybe I wasn't actually making a choice at all. Like it was all just like physics or something like that.
Well, I mean, that is the big debate, right? That's what everyone is trying to figure out. And that's where we get these two ideas, compatibilism and incompatibilism. So compatibilists, they think that free will and determinism can actually both be true at the same time. While incompatibilists say, nope, those two ideas totally don't work together.
Okay, so it's kind of like some people are saying that these two ideas can, they can work it out, they can find a way to coexist. But others are saying, no way, this is a deal breaker.
Exactly. And the Oxford Handbook dives right into these different arguments. And there are a lot of them. You've got arguments from theology, arguments from logic, arguments from science. It really covers it all.
Yeah, and speaking of theology, that's where it gets really interesting for me. I mean, if God knows everything, right? If God knows the past, the present, and the future, does that mean that our choices are already like set in stone? Doesn't that kind of, take the free out of free will?
Right. Well, that's the classic problem of theological fatalism, isn't it?
Yes.
That if God has this perfect knowledge of what's going to happen, then it's like our lives are already written. But the handbook does, it offers a few potential solutions. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, all right. I'm all ears. What are some of these solutions?
So one approach is to really question whether we're even thinking about God's knowledge in the right way. Like, do we as humans, with our limited understanding of what beliefs are and what knowledge is, do we really get how an infinite being like God might actually know things? Maybe God's knowledge is just completely beyond our concept of time. So this whole idea of a predetermined future, maybe it just doesn't really apply to God.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty mind-blowing, but I guess I can sort of see how that might work. It's like God sees the whole tapestry of time all at once, not just a straight timeline like we do. But are there other ways to kind of reconcile God's knowledge with our free will?
Oh yeah, there are definitely other ways. There's this thing called the alchemist solution. And basically it says that even though God knows the future, that knowledge, it doesn't force us to choose one way or another,
Right.
It's like God knows the whole movie script of our lives, but we're still the actors, right? We're the ones making the choices in each scene.
So God's like a fan watching the movie, not the director.
Well, exactly. God's knowledge doesn't mess with our freedom to choose.
Yeah.
And then there's this even more complicated idea. It's called middle knowledge. And this one suggests that God knows all the possible choices we could make, what would happen as a result of each choice, and then God uses that knowledge to create the world.
Okay, hold on. So you're saying God is like a set designer, basically, creating the world, but knowing how our choices might play out.
Exactly. God kind of sets the stage, but we still have that freedom to act within that framework. Now, of course, not everyone agrees with these solutions, but it's really interesting to see how theologians have tried to make sense of this whole problem.
Yeah, it definitely shows you how deep this whole question of free will really goes. But Maybe we can shift gears a little bit, talk about something a bit more scientific.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
I think so, yeah, quantum physics.
Quantum physics, exactly.
Let's get subatomic.
Yeah.
So as I recall, classical physics, it was all about, predictable cause and effect. Like A leads to B, no surprises. But then quantum mechanics shows up and basically says, hold my beer.
Right, exactly. Quantum mechanics just throws in this whole element of randomness, and it's all happened at the subatomic level. So, you know how in classical physics, if you knew absolutely everything about a system, you could predict what was going to happen with perfect accuracy. Well, in the quantum world, it's different. There's just this built-in uncertainty.
So instead of having these nice, neat billiard balls bouncing around in a predictable way, we've got these tiny particles doing all sorts of crazy, unpredictable stuff.
Right, and even the physicists, even they can't fully predict what these particles are going to do.
Wow. Okay, so the universe has like a wild card up its sleeve, basically, but I don't quite get how this connects to free will.
Well, some people say that this quantum randomness that we're talking about, maybe it creates a space for free will to actually work.
Yeah.
So, our brains are made up of these particles, these unpredictable particles, so maybe our choices aren't as fixed as we might think.
So maybe it's not just like fate or God's plan, but these tiny, tiny quantum dice rolls that are influencing the decisions we make. But does that really count as free will? I mean, isn't it just random chance at that point?
Well, that's one of the big counter arguments, right? And the Oxford Handbook lays it out pretty clearly. Does randomness actually equal real choice? Or is it just like, flipping a coin? Plus, we don't even know for sure if these quantum events even affect our brains in a way that matters for making decisions. So it's a cool idea, but we're not quite there yet in terms of proof.
Yeah. Okay, so quantum physics, it might make the universe a little less predictable, but it doesn't necessarily solve the mystery of free will.
Right.
But if we're talking about the brain, I mean, shouldn't we ask what neuroscience has to say about all of this?
Oh, absolutely. Neuroscience adds a whole other level of complexity to this debate. Makes us wonder, is that feeling we have of making choices, is it really as in control as we think it is?
All right. Well, let's dive into the brain then. I'm ready to get a little neuro-nerdy. Let's do it. All right. So we're back, ready to keep going down this rabbit hole of the brain and free will. Last time, I think we ended on this question of what does neuroscience have to say about all of this, right? Like, does it actually back up this feeling that we have that we're in control, or does it show us that something else is going on that we don't even realize?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? In neuroscience, it really doesn't make things any easier. I'll tell you that. One of the things that makes the Oxford Handbook so interesting is that it gives us all these classic philosophical arguments, but then it also throws in all this scientific stuff. It's really cool. Like those sources you gave me, they really get into some of those really tough debates.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like that one by Carl Jeanette, some neglected pathways in the free will labyrinth or something like that. Man, that one really, really made me think about some of my basic ideas about choice.
Well, yeah, Jeanette, he's great. He points out that we tend to oversimplify, what it even means to have different possibilities, different choices. Like, we tend to think that we need to have all these different paths laid out in front of us, like a fork in the road or something. But he's saying that even if our past choices kind of led us to a certain point, even if we couldn't have, avoided ending up at that fork in the road, we still have a real choice in that moment.
So it's less about having a rewind button, to go back and explore all the different paths we could have taken. It's more about actually being able to make a real choice at each point, at each decision point, even if those points were kind of, I don't know, predetermined.
Yeah, exactly. He's saying we don't need to be able to imagine ourselves rewinding our lives and making completely different choices in order to have free will. It's not about that.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty subtle point, but it's making me think about choice in a totally different way. It's not about having infinite options, but about the genuineness of the choices we make in the situation that we're in with the options that we have.
Exactly. And Janae, he makes another really important point, which is the difference between making something happen and something just happening to you. He says that even if even if our desires and our beliefs, they influence our actions, it doesn't mean that we're not in control. It's about our ability to act on those desires, to think about them, to compare them, and then, ultimately to choose.
Okay, so even if I really, really want pizza, I'm still the one deciding to actually order it. I'm not just some sort of pizza craving robot.
Exactly. It's that ability to act on what we want and what we believe. That's what makes us agents. That's what gives us agency.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm starting to see how this whole debate, it really comes down to some very specific, definitions of choice and ability and freedom. It's pretty complicated.
It is. It's very nuanced, and that's why it's so important to look at those philosophical arguments, because they give us the foundation for understanding all the scientific evidence that we're talking about.
Right. Okay, well, speaking of science, let's bring it back to the brain. I mean, we've all heard about those famous Benjamin Libet experiments, right? The ones that seem to suggest that our brains are making decisions before we even know it.
Oh yeah, Libet's experiments, those were big. They really shook things up. What he found was that the brain activity that's connected to an action, it actually starts before the person consciously decides to do that action.
Whoa, wait, so my brain's already getting ready to do something before I even have that aha moment of deciding to do it. That's kind of creepy. So does that mean our conscious minds are just kind of, I don't know, playing catch up or something?
Well, that's one way to interpret it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's led some people to think that maybe conscious control is just an illusion. But there are, like always, there are other ways to look at it.
Okay. Give me some hope here. I'm not ready to give up my sense of agency just yet.
Okay, well, some people argue that this brain activity that happens before we're aware of it, it's just a prep process. It's like getting things ready for when we do make a conscious decision. It's like the brain is warming up the engine, but we're still the ones who decide where to drive.
Okay, yeah. So my brain's doing some background work, but I'm still the one in the driver's seat. I like that. I like that analogy.
But even if that's true, I mean, it still makes you wonder, how much control do we really have?
It does. It definitely does. And the handbook really digs into those questions, those really tough questions. For example, there's this idea of veto power. So even if actions start unconsciously, maybe we can still consciously stop them. So maybe we don't have full control over that first impulse, but we can still decide whether we actually follow through with it.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of like hitting the brakes before you do something you might regret.
Yeah.
It's more of a back and forth between your conscious and unconscious mind than we might realize.
Right, exactly. But then things get even more complicated when we start to think about certain neurological conditions. Oh yeah, that's where it gets really, really interesting. I'm always fascinated by how the brain can sometimes, just sort of glitch.
Well, yeah, think about something like alien hand syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
That's where people they feel like their hand is acting on its own.
Yeah.
Or eye disorder, which you see a lot with schizophrenia. That's where people, they feel like their thoughts and actions, they're not really their own.
Wow. Those sound really scary. The feeling of being in control is just totally gone.
Exactly. And these conditions, they really show us just how deeply our sense of self and our sense of control, they're connected to the physical parts of our brain, how our brains are actually working.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that our brains are incredibly, incredibly complex, and that what we consciously experience, it's really just one part of a much bigger picture.
Right. And it brings us back to this question of what does it even mean to be in control of our actions? If so much is happening that we don't even know about.
Yeah, that's a huge question, and I think it leads us to another really important part of this whole debate. The idea of moral responsibility. If our choices aren't as free as we think they are, does that mean that we can't really be held accountable for what we do?
That's one of the toughest parts of this whole free will discussion, and it's something that philosophers, they've been arguing about this for for centuries.
Hmm.
Some of the sources you gave me, they really get into the details of all that.
Oh yeah, like that chapter by Galen Strawson, The Bounds of Freedom. That one really, really got me thinking about the limits of responsibility.
Right, Strawson. Yeah, he argues that if you kind of follow that chain of cause and effect back far enough, you eventually reach a point where you can't reasonably say that someone's responsible for their actions. Because at some point, their choices, they were shaped by things that were totally outside of their control, like their genes or how they were raised or their environment. He calls it the problem of ultimate responsibility.
Okay, so it's kind of like I might be responsible for eating that extra slice of pizza, but I'm not responsible for being born with a love of pizza.
Exactly. And Strawson, he takes this argument pretty far. He says that ultimately, like, none of us can be truly responsible for our actions in this ultimate sense.
Oh, okay. That's a pretty radical idea. It kind of makes you wonder, like, what's the point of even trying to be a good person if we're not really in control?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? But Strawson, he doesn't think this means that we should just give up on morality altogether. He says that even if ultimate responsibility is an illusion, we can still hold people accountable in a more practical sense.
Okay, how does that work? I'm having a little trouble following that.
So he's saying that our moral reactions, like when we praise someone or blame someone, those things are really important for society to function. They help us control behavior, and they create a sense of justice, even if they're not ultimately based on this idea of free will.
So even if free will doesn't really exist in this absolute sense, we still have to act like it does in order to have a society that works. It's kind of like a necessary lie or something.
That's one way to think about it, and it's something that Ted Hondrick, he really emphasizes that in his chapter. He says that the real problem isn't about whether determinism is true or false. It's about how we live with that knowledge. He talks about this view called attitudinal emotionalism, which basically means that our beliefs about free will, they're not really about, the objective truth. They're more about how we feel about this idea of determinism.
Oh, interesting. So even if determinism is true, we still have a choice in how we feel about it. We can choose to accept it or reject it.
Exactly. Hondrick, he says that we can choose to focus on the things in life that give us meaning, that give us purpose, even if we accept that our choices are ultimately predetermined.
Okay, yeah, that's a more optimistic way to look at it. It's like even in a deterministic world, we can still find joy and meaning. But I have to ask, if hard determinism is really true, doesn't that have some pretty big implications for how we think about justice and punishment?
Absolutely. And that's something the Oxford Handbook really, really tackles head on.
All right, well, let's dive into that then. Let's get controversial. All right, we're back and ready for the final part of our free will deep dive. So far, we've talked about everything from those theological ideas to quantum physics. We even got into how our brains might be making decisions before we even know it.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. Lots of really complicated stuff, and I'm sure we've all had those moments where like, wait, what?
Yeah, definitely. But now I'm really curious about those successor views that we mentioned before. Like, what happens if we actually just accept that free will the way we usually think about it? What if it's just an illusion? Can we still have a society that functions? Can we still find meaning and purpose in our lives?
Those are the big questions, aren't they? And the Oxford Handbook, it doesn't shy away from them at all. And what's interesting is that a lot of these successor views, they actually suggest that a life without free will, it might not be as bad as we think.
Okay, all right. I'm definitely open to hearing some good news here, because honestly, the idea of living in a world where everything is already decided, it just feels kind of, I don't know, depressing.
Yeah, I get that. It can feel like our choices, they don't really matter if everything's already set in stone. But one of the key ideas that comes out of these successor views is this concept of meaning making.
Meaning making, so creating our own meaning, even though we don't have ultimate control over everything.
Right, exactly. Philosophers like Saul Smolenski, they argue that even if our choices aren't aren't ultimately free, in that absolute sense. We can still create meaning. We can still create value through the things we do, the actions we take, and the relationships we have.
So it's less about being like the author of the story and more about, how we choose to play our part.
That's a great way to put it. It's like think of it like being an actor in a play. You didn't write the script, but you can still bring your own interpretation to the role. You can connect with the other actors, and you can really move the audience with your performance.
Yeah, I like that. I like that analogy. It kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. It's not about having control over the whole production. It's about finding the meaning in the performance itself.
Right, exactly. And Smolansky, he even goes so far as to say that this belief in free will, even if it's not real, it might be like super important for society to actually work. He calls this idea illusionism.
Wait, so he's saying we need to believe in free will, even if it's not true.
That's what he's saying, yeah.
Yeah.
He says that some beliefs, even if they're not, objectively true, they can still be like really beneficial for us as individuals and for society as a whole.
Interesting. So it's kind of like a placebo effect, but for morality. Like we need to believe in free will so that we, hold ourselves accountable and try to improve ourselves and create a just and ethical society.
Exactly. Smolansky's worried that without that belief, we might just become, I don't know, apathetic or even nihilistic.
Right, yeah. If we really believe that our choices don't matter, then what's the point of even trying to be good or to make the world a better place?
Exactly. That's the danger. But even if we accept that free will might be an illusion, it doesn't mean that we have to just throw away all of our ideas about morality.
So what are some other ways to kind of reconcile this idea of a deterministic world with our our desire to live meaningful, ethical lives?
Well, another successor view that the Oxford Handbook talks about is one by Richard Double. He says that instead of getting stuck on this big debate about whether free will exists or not, we should focus more on what our moral beliefs mean in a practical sense.
So less about like proving or disproving free will and more about, how our beliefs about it actually affect how we act.
Right. Double's argument is that even if we never really solve the free will question, for sure, we can still make choices about how we want to live, how we want to treat other people, and what kind of society we want to build.
So even if we don't have like complete control over everything, we still have agency in our everyday lives. We can still choose to act with compassion, with integrity, with responsibility, even if those choices are ultimately already determined.
Exactly. It's about focusing on what we do and what our intentions are, even if we recognize that our freedom has limits.
Yeah, that's actually pretty empowering. It's like the debate about free will, it might go on forever, but we can still choose to be the heroes of our own stories.
I love that. And it brings up another really important point that the Oxford Handbook makes.
Yeah.
Even if our choices are, already determined, the process of thinking things through, of deliberating, that's still important.
So even if the ending is already written, the journey still matters.
Absolutely. A lot of philosophers, they say that the act of thinking about moral problems, weighing different options, really trying to make the best choices, all of that is valuable in itself. It doesn't matter what the outcome is.
So even if I'm destined to eat that extra slice of pizza, the fact that I thought about choosing the healthier option, the fact that I thought about it, that I struggled with it, all of that still means something.
It absolutely does. Those internal struggles, those moments when we really think things through, they shape who we are. They help us learn and grow, and they show that we're committed to living a thoughtful and intentional life.
Yeah, I'm really starting to see how a deterministic world, it doesn't have to be like a sad or a meaningless place. There's still so much room for us to grow, to connect with each other, and to do the right thing.
Exactly. And that's one of the most powerful things that we can take away from this whole deep dive. The free will debate, it might not have, easy answers, but it makes us think about some of the most basic questions about what it means to be human.
It's definitely been a really mind-bending journey, but I feel like I'm walking away with more questions than answers.
And that's a good thing, because as we've seen, the free will debate, it's not about finding the one right answer.
Mm.
It's about that process of exploring, of thinking, and of finding meaning.
Well said. Well said. So, to our listener, we encourage you to keep asking those questions, to keep looking at things from different angles, and to keep searching for meaning and purpose in your own way.
Because even in a world without absolute freedom, there's still so much beauty and wonder to discover.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Oxford Handbook of Free Will. We'll catch you next time on the deep dive. Ooh.